In this video we're going to create this lander inside of Maya. We'll begin by creating a free image plane and adding our template to it. Holding down the space bar, I'll go to Create, Free Image Plane. I'll go to the Attributes, and in the Attributes there's a little folder as if we were importing a texture. I'll click on it, and I'll go out and get my file. And once I've got it selected, I'll hit Open. I'll hit W on the keyboard, and I'll move this to the back a bit. If we take a look at the template, the large rectangle at the top would be the top view of the lander, the proportions of it, and this would be the side thickness of it. If I wanted to, I could go into my orthographic view, and I'll hit F on the keyboard to get close to this, and I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitives. I've made sure that I've chosen Interactive down at the bottom. Now I'm going to choose Cube. I'll click and drag, and then I will go to my perspective view. I'll start to give it a little thickness. So if we look at it this view, this is the right proportion if we're looking down on top of the lander. I'm going to rotate this now, and I'm going to use my channel box to do so. I'll rotate it on the x-axis 90 or minus 90. Either one will give us the same. And now I'm going to go back to my orthographic view, and I'll move the box down, and I'll scale it to fit this narrower rectangle that we see here. I'll hit R on the keyboard, and I'll start to scale that till I get the right size. If I wanted to, I could hit 4 on the keyboard. So if we go to our perspective view now, we have the body size and shape, and we've got it oriented the way we want. Before I go any further, I'm going to lock the template to its own layer. I'll select it, and then over in the channel box where I see my layers, I'll click on the little icon with the white plane and the blue ball, and I'll double click on that, and now I can go ahead and name that appropriately. I'll just put template and click on save and deselect it. Now it won't move. All right, so now we're going to be using a series of cylinders, and we're going to make this piece that we see right here. I'll start my perspective view, and I'll go to Create, and I'll go to Polygon Cylinder, and I'll start to drag a bit of a cylinder like this, and I'll give it some height. I'll return again to the orthographic view. We'll be using that orthographic view to get all of this the way we want. I'll go ahead and I'll put it into position. Now, I'm going to hit 5 on the keyboard, and in the viewports, each one separately, we could go in. If I was to click on these two little interlocking white boxes, it gives me a ghost image, which means if it's deselected, I can still see it in context with that template. So now I want to go in and scale that so it's the same circumference and the same height. By doing that, I can right-click and choose Vertex now, if I've got the circumference the way I want, and I can change the height of it by selecting those vertexes. I'm going to duplicate this to make the smaller one down here. I'll hit Command D. I'll slide it down, and I'll right-click and choose vertexes. I'll grab the vertices on top, and I'll pull them down to get the height I need. I'll right-click and choose Object Mode. Now we have to make that thin cylinder in the middle. And it's pretty simple to do because this is very symmetrical, which means if I was to duplicate the larger one by hitting Command D, and I start to pull that down, and then get my scale tool and start to scale it, I can now start to introduce the piece I want. Now I have to do a little refinement here, so I'll make it a little thinner, and then I'll go ahead and give it the height it needs. So if we look at our perspective view, we're now looking at this piece. That cylinder in the middle, that thin one, is a copy of what's going on up here in the arm joint and the leg as well. So I will start by duplicating it in my orthographic view, and then I'll move it up into position, and I'll rotate it on the z-axis 90 degrees, and now I'll start to put it into position and change the length of it as well as the circumference of it. Once I have it in position, now I just need to change the length of this. I'll kind of center it a bit, hitting R on the keyboard, and I'll scale it get the length I need, and I'll hit Command S to save. Now we have a simple sphere at the end of this. So I'm going to go to Create in my orthographic view, Polygon Primitives, and I'll grab the sphere, and I'll draw it up here in that general area, and then I'll go to my perspective view and see how this relates to what I just created. So I can see it's off a bit. I can use my orthographic views at this point. I'll use my top view for this, and I'll just kind of hold down the V, and I'll drag and snap it there first. I'll hit F on the keyboard, and I'll just refine it here in my orthographic view now. I have something like this. I'm now going to return to my orthographic view, and I'll hit A on the keyboard to zoom back. Now I need another sphere for here, and I need a cylinder, thin cylinder like this one here, and then here. So I'll start by selecting the sphere. I'll hit Command D, and I'll put that into position. And in this instance, it's a little smaller, so I'll get my scale tool, and I'll tweak it to the size close to what the template has. And then I'll select the cylinder shape. I'll hit Command D for it. And I think what I'll do first is I'm going to rotate this again on the Z-axis. I'll make it 0, and I'll do the vertical piece of that lander leg first. And I'll go ahead and scale it. I'm going to right-click and go to Vertex, and I'll just grab the top vertices and just pull them up to the cylinder. And I'll save. Now we need one for this piece right here. So let's go ahead and we'll just duplicate this one again. Command D. And I'll start to play with the length a little bit. And then I'll move it into position. I'm going to hit F on the keyboard to get close to this template. I'll use my rotation tool, and I'll give it a bit of a rotation, put it in position. And then if I have to, I can play with the length of this as well. Right-click, Vertex, and I'll grab the end of this, and I'll move it here for the length. Now if we go to a perspective view, this is what we have. Now we have to do the little cup, landing cup that we see on the bottom of this leg here. That's nothing more than a sphere. So I'm going to introduce the sphere from the top view because we have to cut off the bottom of it so it's a cup shape. Hold down the space bar, I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitive Sphere, and I'll draw a shape of a sphere. Going to my orthographic view, I'll take a look at my template for reference. I'll put it into position. I'll hit F on the keyboard. Scale looks pretty good, so I'm going to right-click and choose Face, and I'm going to eliminate a little bit more than half the faces here. I'll hit Delete, go back to my object mode, center the pivot, and I'll put it into position, and I'll rotate it close to the way the template is set up. And if I go to my perspective view now, this is what I have. Now I have to put that into position here. So again, I'll use my top view, and I'll hold down V, and I'll snap it to the general area. Hitting F on the keyboard, I can now zoom in, and I can kind of refine that. I'll hit 4 on the keyboard so I can kind of see through to where the leg actually is here at the bottom. And I'll go to my perspective view. Next, we're going to combine the elements that will be static. So I'm going to select the pieces that comprise the leg, and I'll go to Mesh Combine, and then I'll select the sphere here and this one, and I'll combine those, hitting Command S to save. And now we'll make the little claw that we see right here. We're going to use a polygon cube and our extrude tool. So I will go back to my orthographic view, and I'll tighten up the view there. Holding down the space bar, I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Cube. I'll click and drag around the template. Jumping to my perspective view, I'll give it a little thickness, and I'm going to return to my orthographic view. Now in order to extrude this piece, we're going to use the edge loop. Right-clicking, choosing face, I'll select the inside face, click on my extrude tool. I'll jump to my orthographic view with the template, and I'll give it the length. And we can see that it's a bit tapered down there, so I'll activate the scale tool, and I'll just taper it a bit. In my perspective view, I should have something like this. I'll right-click and go to Object Mode, and I'll save. Centering the pivot and freezing the transforms. Next, we'll put that little claw hand in position. It's going to be embedded in this sphere here. So I'll click on it, going to my orthographic views. I'll hit F to refine the view, and I'll hold down V on the keyboard, and I'll snap it, and then I'll put it into position, hitting F once again to get on top of this. I'm now going to go to my orthographic view again, hitting F on the keyboard, turning off the template for a moment. We can see what we have thus far. We need another one of these little claws in the opposite orientation. So I will hit Command D to duplicate, and then on the x-axis in my channel box, I'll make it 180, and then I'll put that into position as well. Now I want to break up the monotony of this angular kind of effect here. So I'm going to move the pivot holding D. I'll move it down to here, and I'll hit E on the keyboard. I'm just going to rotate it just a little bit, just to break up the monotony of that right angle. And I'll do the same for this one. Holding down D, put the pivot there, hitting E, give it a little bit of a rotation. This piece needs to be duplicated because we need to have an elbow and then the forearm. I'll hit W on the keyboard, I'll hit Command D to duplicate, and I'll pull this out like that. In my orthographic view, I'll go ahead and move the pivot, holding down D, and I'll put it on the sphere. And if I were to hit E on the keyboard, now I can rotate that down. Now we'll go back to the front here. I'll marquee select the two claws and that first cylindrical sphere shape, and I'll combine them. Going to Mesh, Combine. So essentially, this is going to be one solid piece that when we animate it, it's going to be articulating from that sphere that we just replicated with the cylinder. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save that. This is what we should have right now. If I were to go ahead and turn the template on again, you can see now we have the propeller to make. And I'm going to go to the orthographic view. We're going to introduce a polygon cube again. Holding down the space bar, I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitives Cube, and I'll click and drag a polygon cube that comes down to about here before it starts to taper at the bottom. And then I'll go to my perspective view and I'll give it a little bit of thickness. Back in the orthographic view, I'll right click and I'll choose Vertex, and I'm going to taper it at the top with my Scale tool, and with my Move tool I'll put it in position. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard, so when you go back and forth to 1 and 3, you can see kind of how this will be affected if we were to run Polygon Smooth or leave the Smooth proxy on. I'll hit 1 on the keyboard. Now we're going to go down to the bottom, and we're going to extrude to get those other sections. So I'll right click and choose Face. I'll select the bottom face, and I'll jump to my orthographic view with the template, and I'll go to Edit Mesh, and I'll choose my Extrude tool. Clicking on the blue dial, I'll go ahead and pull down. I'll scale. I'll move it over to keep it kind of proportional to the template. So if I was to take the ghosting off, you can see there's the geometry I have. I'll put that back on so I can see the template a little better. And I can also edit my vertexes if I needed to get this closer to what I wanted. I'm going to extrude another face, so I'll go back to my perspective view. I'll right click and choose face. I'll select that face again. Going back to my orthographic view, I'll get my extrude tool again, click on the blue dial, and I'll pull it straight down. And I'm going to go to my perspective view now to see what I have so far. So we've got this very blocky shape. And if I were to hit 3 on the keyboard, it doesn't resemble much of what's going on in the template. Now we'll introduce some edges to kind of firm this up a bit. I'll get my edge loop tool, and I'll start by putting one at the very top, hitting 3 on the keyboard to see what I have, and then hitting 1 to return to it. And then I'll come down to where these polygons were extruded, and I'm going to introduce an edge here and there, and then here, here, and then at the very bottom as close as I can get it there. And now if I go to my object mode and I hit 3 on the keyboard, I have something closer to what I want. Now it's got a little bit of a point here, so I'll hit 1 on the keyboard again. I'll get my edge loop tool, and I'll put one kind of in the center vertically. Right clicking, choosing vertex. I'll select the vertices at the top, and if I were to take a look at my template, now I can just kind of pull that up a bit to get the point I want. Returning to my perspective view, I'll go to my object mode, turn off my template, and I'll hit 3 on the keyboard and deselect. So this is what we have so far as the modeling goes. The next step, we'll assemble this.